The morning began with steam. The dish pit of MIT's main dining hall was not a place where names mattered. Stainless steel walls sweated from boiling rinse water, conveyor belts groaned with trays, and a single boy's hands moved through endless waves of soap. His name, Noah Reed, was written only once, in faint marker on the schedule board. Noah R. Dish Shift. That was all. No one called him Noah. He was Kid, Hey, or most often, nothing at all. Students dropped their trays, never looking down. Professors strode past with their minds already orbiting equations, brushing close enough to splatter his shoes with broth. One graduate student once muttered to a friend, "Walk near that pit and your shoes smell forever." They laughed. The boy bent lower over his work, pressing a chipped plate into the scalding spray. Invisible. That was his real job title. Yet even invisibility has senses. While others carried earbuds humming lo-fi beats, Noah's world pulsed with different rhythms, the hum of motors, the metallic click of relays, the faint tremor in a breaker panel when a load surged. Raised in a trailer park outside Worcester, he had grown up with more broken fans than working lamps, more frayed cords than working outlets. His education was not algebra, but continuity. If the neutral lug was loose, the light would flicker. If the fan's coil hummed too loudly, it would burn before winter ended. He had learned to smell electricity before he could shave. Ozone, sharp and metallic, meant arcing. Phenolic smoke meant a terminal heating under strain. To him, these were dialects of a language older than English. Still, here at MIT, that language was muted under soap and water. At the edge of the dining hall stretched a corridor reserved for Helios Lab, one of MIT's crown jewels in applied AI hardware. Behind that glass door lay racks of accelerators cooled by roaring pumps, power distribution cabinets labeled 208Y120V, bus bars carrying more current than a city block of apartments. Noah saw only reflections of himself in the glass. A boy in a plastic apron, rubber gloves, back curved from lifting trays. He always paused, though, eyes drawn to the green LEDs blinking like constellations. He never lingered long. Supervisors disliked loitering. This morning, Layla, another part-time student working food service, slipped him a carton of milk. "You look like you haven't eaten." "Thanks," he murmured, surprised she knew his name. "I'm in Helios this semester," she added quickly, voice carrying that mix of pride and exhaustion known to undergrads. "They've got a huge demo today. Even Professor Hart's here." Noah nodded. Hart was a legend in AI theory, his name printed on journals thicker than bricks. To Noah, it meant little. What caught his attention instead was a faint dimming of the ceiling lights. 1 second, maybe less. Enough to make his pulse shift. He sniffed the air. Soap. Steam. But beneath it, very faint. Ozone. Ms. Delaney, the cafeteria manager, barked orders. "Reed, mop that floor by the hallway. Don't let the donors slip." She never looked him in the eye. Noah fetched the mop, pressed it against slick tiles, listening. The building spoke in murmurs. The HVAC unit cycling, the thud of pumps, a vibration just beyond the wall. Down the hall, the donors arrived. Suits, polished shoes, the quiet arrogance of those who never considered the price of lunch. Noah moved aside, keeping the mop close to the baseboard. One man grimaced as water brushed the leather of his Oxford shoes. The look he gave was brief, surgical. Noah lowered his gaze. From Helios's glass door came a flash, blue, quick, like a camera bulb. Crack. A sound followed, sharp as a guitar string breaking under too much tension. Then, a second note. Pop, muted but dangerous, the way insulation dies. The lights trembled. Students stopped mid-sentence. Noah's nostrils flared. Ozone, clear now. Phenolic resin, faint but rising. Layla emerged in the hallway, eyes wide, trays forgotten. "Something's wrong in there." Even as she spoke, the emergency stop inside Helios was slammed by someone's hand. The red mushroom button should have silenced everything. Instead, a few fans kept whirring, stubborn, feeding from somewhere they shouldn't. Backfeed. Noah didn't need a textbook. He could hear it in the unsteady whine. Smoke curled from a seam in the auxiliary panel. The donors stumbled backward. Ms. Delaney shouted, "Clear the hall!" Someone screamed fire. Noah didn't think. He dropped the mop, grabbed its wooden handle like a lance, and charged 3 steps forward. At the side of the hallway was a secondary e-stop, a button most people ignored, half hidden by signage. Noah pressed the dry end of the mop handle against it and drove. Clack. The sound was clean, mechanical, like a lock sliding home. The fans stuttered, then died. The corridor fell into silence so sudden that breath itself seemed loud. Emergency lights blinked on. Smoke thinned but did not vanish. On the other side of the glass, Dr. Miriam Klein, head of Helios, turned and saw him. Her eyes widened, not with panic, but with recognition. The donors whispered, "Who is that kid?" No one answered. Noah stood with the mop handle lowered, chest rising and falling, soap still drying on his arms. He didn't look heroic. He looked like someone who had simply acted before anyone else could. Inside Helios, Professor Hart pressed both palms to a console, lips moving in disbelief. Graduate researchers scattered for fire extinguishers, uncertain which switch was safe. Noah's gaze lingered on the auxiliary cabinet. He knew what had happened. A neutral connection loose, heating under load, the contactor coil sticking, sending voltage backward through a control loop. He had seen its smaller cousins in trailer kitchens and cheap fans, just without millions of dollars at stake. Dr. Klein cracked the lab door open, acrid air spilling into the hall. "You," she called, pointing not at a graduate student, not at Professor Hart, but at the boy with the mop. "Stay. I need another pair of eyes, and I don't care what your badge says." For the first time all day, someone had spoken to Noah Reed as though his presence mattered. He set the mop aside carefully, like a craftsman putting down a trusted tool. The donors stared, confused. Ms. Delaney muttered protests about kitchen staff. Professor Hart raised his voice. "That's absurd, Miriam. He's a dishwasher." But Noah was already moving, stepping across the invisible border between the dining hall and the lab. Behind him, the smell of soap, ahead the smell of ozone, and between them, a space no one had believed belonged to him. MIT's dining hall smelled of starch, steel, and exhaustion. Students moved like flocks, trays clattering, voices spilling over one another in arguments about algorithms, startups, and summer internships. But just beyond the serving line, in the dish pit, another world lived, a world where time was measured not in semesters or credit hours, but in racks of plates. Noah Reed had worked here since September, 6 nights a week. The shifts were long, but the hours were predictable, and predictability was a rare currency in his life. Rent for the trailer lot outside Worcester was due at the first of every month. His mother's back rent was already 2 weeks late. So he worked. His job was simple in the way only grinding labor could be simple. Scrape, rinse, load, spray, stack. The steam made his hair curl at the edges, the gloves left his fingers raw, and his apron smelled faintly of sour milk, no matter how often he washed it. Yet behind each gesture, Noah's mind ticked with the rhythm of circuits. The pit had its own ecosystem of indignities. When the rush of dinner ended, trays stacked faster than the conveyor could swallow them. Students cursed when their shoes slipped on the damp tile. A professor once strode through the back hall on his way to Helios Lab, muttering, "I swear, Walking here ruins a good pair of Oxfords." He wasn't speaking to Noah. He wasn't speaking to anyone. The words were just tossed into the air, and Noah, standing ankle-deep in gray water, caught them like shrapnel. Even Ms. Delaney, the cafeteria manager, knew only one register of speech: imperatives. "Mop that spill. Clear that rack. Faster." She did not mean to be cruel. Cruelty requires recognition. This was something colder, non-recognition. It wasn't just the people. It was the system. The payroll stubs that identified him only by an employee number. The ID card that let him swipe into the basement but not into the labs above. The hours that rolled forward in endless loops while classes changed, semesters shifted, and buildings acquired new wings. Students graduated, Nobel laureates retired, but the dish pit remained, sucking in names and spitting them out as if none had ever mattered. Noah had a word for it: the ecology of the invisible. Still, invisibility sharpened his senses. He noticed the small things no one else did. The way the industrial dishwasher tripped its GFCI outlet twice a month, always when the motor's insulation grew damp. How the fluorescent tubes above the tray return hummed louder when the ballast began to fail. That the kitchen's breaker panel had one lug whose set screw had never been tightened to torque spec. He could tell because it heated just slightly under load, enough to perfume the hallway with a ghost of burnt plastic. He didn't fix these things because he was paid to. He fixed them because he hated sloppiness. Because in the trailer park, sloppiness meant fires. Fires meant losing everything you owned in a night. At 13, he had learned to replace a ceiling fan motor by scavenging parts from 2 broken ones. At 14, he rewired his mother's toaster to bypass a bad thermal fuse, carefully adding an inline switch so it wouldn't become a grenade. By 16, he knew enough to be dangerous, but also enough to be careful. His one rule: never touch a live circuit without checking twice. His second rule: always assume someone else wired it wrong. Those rules hummed in him now as naturally as a heartbeat. One evening, during a lull, Layla drifted by. She was balancing a tray of cups, but her eyes searched the hall. "You know," she said, lowering her voice, "Helios is running a massive stress test tomorrow. They're pulling peak current through the whole system." Noah arched an eyebrow. "Through those racks of servers?" She nodded, impressed he knew. "Yep, all accelerators at full load. They've been rewiring the auxiliary distribution panel all week." Noah's mind drew the picture. A motor control center feeding 3-phase into racks, step-down transformers pushing 200 AY 120 V, contactor coils driven by 24 VDC. Plenty of places for a connection to loosen. Plenty of ways for an e-stop to fail if backfeed wasn't trapped properly. He dried his hands on a rag. "They torque the lugs?" Layla blinked. "The what?" He almost laughed, but stopped. "Never mind." She smiled, though a little uneasily. She liked Noah, but she also knew he spoke in a language most ignored, the grammar of wires, breakers, and coils. A language not found in any MIT syllabus. Later that night, Noah repaired a socket in the back hall. Officially, he wasn't supposed to. But the outlet sparked every time someone plugged in the floor scrubber, and the janitors had begun avoiding it. Noah killed the breaker, unscrewed the faceplate, and revealed wires twisted together with nothing but friction holding them. No wire nut, no tape, just bare copper shoved into space. "Lazy," he muttered. He trimmed, stripped, retwisted, and capped them properly. When he restored the breaker, the plug held steady, humming like a string tuned back to pitch. No one thanked him. No one noticed. The outlet simply worked. That was enough. Every ecosystem has predators. In the dish pit, it was time. Hours chewed through flesh and patience alike. By the end of his shift, Noah's shoulders burned, his fingers pruned white. He trudged outside into the Cambridge night, cool air cutting the fog of soap from his lungs. MIT's great dome loomed in the distance, lit like a lantern. Inside those walls, equations were carved into the air. Professors shaped futures. Students plotted trajectories to Mars. And here he was, walking home with a backpack that smelled of bleach. Yet Noah didn't resent it. Not exactly. Resentment meant you expected something different. He had learned not to expect. He had learned to listen instead, to currents, to smells, to the quiet warnings of circuits about to fail. As he crossed Mass Ave, a thought flickered, uninvited. If something went wrong in Helios tomorrow, would anyone know what to do? He shook his head. That wasn't his problem. He was a dishwasher, nothing more. Still, as he lay in his narrow bed that night, he swore he could hear it. The faint crackle of a contactor straining, the whisper of ozone curling under a door. Sleep came late. Helios Lab at MIT was not built to be subtle. It was built to impress, to intimidate, to hum like the beating heart of a century not yet born. Anyone stepping through its glass doors crossed into an engineered cathedral, rows of racks glowing with green diodes, fans purring in tight synchrony, stainless steel manifolds circulating chilled water like arteries through a giant mechanical body. Students nicknamed it the engine room of the future. Professors called it proof of MIT's supremacy. Donors, when they visited, saw only dollar signs glowing blue in the LEDs. For Noah Reed, glancing in from the hallway, Helios was something else entirely, a conversation. The language wasn't equations or theories. It was wiring diagrams, torque specs, amperage ratings etched on the sides of breakers. Every contactor and bus bar whispered stories he could half hear through the glass. If the dish pit was his exile, Helios was the promised land. On this day, Helios was alive with tension. Inside, Dr. Miriam Klein stood at the front of a cluster of researchers. Her hair was pinned tight, her sleeves rolled, her hands marked faintly with grease. Unlike many of her colleagues, Klein touched machines herself. She had been an engineer before becoming a scientist, and she carried that reputation like a quiet badge. Today's load test will push the accelerator array to 98% of thermal capacity, she announced, voice firm. If cooling falters, we risk cavitation in the pumps. If power distribution falters, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. The silence finished for her. At her side, Professor Julian Hart exhaled through his nose like a man too important to waste breath. Hart was pure theory, pure elegance, pure dismissal. His papers on optimization had redefined neural architectures. His reputation filled auditoriums. He spoke less to people than at them. He leaned against a console now, arms folded, tie unwrinkled despite the humidity. Your engineering, Miriam, is sound enough. I doubt a simple load test will surprise us. A graduate student, Arjun, shifted uncomfortably. He had been up all night running diagnostic checks. He knew how close the margins were. Layla, sweeping cables at the back, caught his eye and offered the smallest shrug. Both of them knew. Helios's brilliance was fragile. Noah, mopping outside, caught flickers through the glass. The hand gestures, the pointing at diagrams, the stiff posture of Hart, the bent shoulders of students scribbling notes. He couldn't hear the words, but he understood the dynamics. Hierarchy pressed onto hierarchy. He lingered a moment too long. Ms. Delaney's voice sliced through. Reed, stop staring. Floors first. He obeyed, but the image stayed. By late afternoon, Helios thrummed at full pitch. Pumps howled. LEDs strobed faster, as if breathless. The array drew so much current the auxiliary panel vibrated like a struck drum. Noah passed by with a cart of trays just as the lights flickered. He froze. It was barely a heartbeat. Most would chalk it up to old wiring, but to Noah it was a warning. He sniffed the air. Soap, steam, and beneath it, faint, unmistakable, the metallic tang of ozone. He whispered to himself, almost like prayer, neutral lug, maybe, or coil heating. But he said nothing aloud. Invisible people had no permission to speak. Inside, Hart continued his performance. What matters, he declared to the donors now assembled, is that Helios represents a billion-dollar frontier. Algorithms are nothing without power, and here power is rendered obedient. His words carried the chill of marble. To him, wires were abstractions, not muscles pulling against load. He gestured to the racks as if they were equations incarnate. This, ladies and gentlemen, is inevitability. Dr. Klein's jaw flexed. She respected his mind, but she distrusted his arrogance. Machines had a way of punishing arrogance. Layla, meanwhile, hovered by the auxiliary cabinet, brow furrowed. She smelled it, too. She didn't know the name of ozone, but she knew trouble. Still, surrounded by donors in Armani suits, her instincts felt small, ignorable. Back in the pit, Noah's rhythm of trays faltered. He leaned on the conveyor, eyes narrowed. The floor hummed under his boots. He recognized the hum. It was the tremor of current searching for an easier path. Soap slid between his fingers as he imagined it. A loose lug heating, a coil welded closed, backfeed creeping where it shouldn't. He thought of the rules he lived by. Assume it's wired wrong. Never trust until tested dead. He wiped his hands on his apron. For a moment he imagined walking straight into Helios, pointing at the cabinet, saying, "Shut it down now or you'll regret it." But he stayed silent. Dishwashers did not give orders to professors. Invisible boys did not warn billion-dollar labs. So he pressed another plate into the scalding spray, jaw tight, heart pacing faster than the conveyor itself. That night, he walked home under the great dome's glow. MIT loomed like Olympus above the Charles River. To the world, it was a beacon of genius. To Noah, it was a fortress he scrubbed from the outside. Yet even fortresses had cracks. And Noah Reed, with his soap-raw fingers and second-hand shoes, had begun to smell the smoke curling through them. Sleep would not come easily. For even as he closed his eyes, he swore he could still hear it. A whisper of ozone, persistent, patient, waiting for someone who could understand. The hallway floor gleamed as though it had been polished for gods, not for donors. Noah Reed pressed his mop into it, pushing water into neat arcs, careful to leave no streaks. He worked silently, his back bent, while voices spilled from the far end where Helios Labs' glass doors opened. The donors were due at any moment. That meant Ms. Delaney's orders had been sharper than usual. Keep the line dry, not a drop out of place. No accidents, not today. So Noah cleaned. His body was present, but his mind drifted. Every few seconds, he glanced at the narrow seam where the corridor wall met the lab. Behind that seam, he could feel the weight of electricity. It was not sound, not exactly vibration. It was pressure, the subtle hum of current-seeking paths of least resistance. He knew that hum the way others knew the taste of their grandmother's soup. And lately, that hum had been wrong. It began 3 days earlier, when the lights along the service hall blinked twice during the evening rush. Students laughed, calling it Cambridge wiring. Noah didn't laugh. He sniffed the air, and the faint tang of ozone stung his nostrils. Yesterday he'd passed the auxiliary breaker panel on his way to take out trash and heard a sound he didn't like, a coil whining half a note sharp, as though a relay armature wasn't seating. He paused, fingertips grazing the metal surface. Warm. too warm for an idle panel. He had wanted to say something, to Layla, maybe, or even to one of the grad students hurrying past with laptops. But what words could he use? "Excuse me, I'm the dishwasher and your neutral lug is loose?" He pictured their faces. Polite smirks at best, dismissal at worst. So he kept quiet. Invisibility was its own gag order. This afternoon, the line had become literal. On the floor tiles near Helios's door, Ms. Delaney had barked at him to scrub extra hard. "The donors will be here. Keep the line shining. Don't cross it." "That's not your territory." She jabbed her finger at the thin strip of tile that marked the lab's threshold. To her, it was just a rule. To Noah, it was scripture, a line carved between worlds. On one side, soap and steam and anonymity. On the other, research worth billions, where names were printed on journal covers and carved into stone. He pressed the mop harder, water pooling briefly before being swallowed by the rag. The floor smelled faintly of bleach, and under it, he caught it again. Ozone. Sharper now, more insistent. He straightened, eyes narrowing. He wasn't imagining it. The hum in the wall was louder than yesterday. A current searching for relief. A whisper that only he seemed to hear. Inside Helios, the tension was building. Through the glass, Noah saw Dr. Klein bent over a schematic with Arjun. She pointed at the cooling system diagram, tracing with her finger. Hart stood nearby, aloof, lecturing two donors as though the machines behind him were his personal stage. Layla hovered at the auxiliary cabinet, lips pressed tight. Noah's instincts screamed. He recognized the signs, subtle, small, but unmistakable. When a neutral lug loosened in the trailer where he grew up, the light above the kitchen table flickered the same way. The fan motor whined at the same pitch. The smell of hot insulation spread in the same pattern. He whispered under his breath, words no one else could hear. "It's cooking itself alive." The donors began to arrive. Polished shoes clicked on the tiles, sharp against the hush of the hall. They moved with the calm arrogance of people unaccustomed to danger, their voices light, curious, already rehearsing stories of this visit for later cocktail hours. One brushed close to Noah's mop bucket, muttering, "Christ, I hope this floor is dry. Can't have this mess on a day like today." Noah pulled the bucket aside. Soap water sloshed. He didn't answer. He rarely did. Words never bought him much. Instead, he crouched, pressing his palm flat to the floor tile near the wall. The vibration confirmed it. Load fluctuation. Something was pulling more than it should. Something was about to give. Inside, Hart raised his voice. Even through the glass, Noah could see his lips forming words shaped like marble. Inevitability, frontier, supremacy. He was smiling, and the donors were smiling back. They weren't looking at the panels. They weren't smelling the ozone. Layla shifted uneasily, but when she tried to speak, Hart's hand lifted, silencing her as neatly as a switch. Dr. Klein caught the exchange, her jaw tightening. She didn't trust arrogance. She had been an engineer too long to believe in inevitability. Machines obeyed torque, current, and time, never ego. The corridor brightened suddenly, then dimmed. A hiccup in the lights. Noah's breath caught. He looked around. The donors barely noticed. To them, it was a flicker, an inconvenience. To him, it was thunder without lightning. He gripped the mop handle tighter. He wanted to walk straight into the lab, plant himself by the auxiliary cabinet, and say the words that burned on his tongue, "Shut it down, now, before it takes the whole system with it." But he didn't move. He stared at the thin line of tile instead. The border, the rule, not your territory. The ecology of the invisible was cruel, not because it mocked you, but because it made you question your own reality. If no one else smelled the ozone, maybe you were wrong. If no one else felt the vibration, maybe it didn't exist. If no one else looked at you, maybe you weren't even there. Noah pressed the mop to the floor again, tracing the invisible boundary. Each stroke felt heavier than the last. Each breath carried that electric tang deeper into his lungs. And then, so faint he almost doubted it, a sound, a click, a sizzle. Not loud, not dramatic, just a whisper of current arcing across a space too small for safety. He froze. His entire childhood condensed into that single note. He had heard it in fans that later caught fire, in outlets that melted, in the hum of a breaker seconds before it blew. His chest tightened. The lab was a fuse, and no one knew. Layla glanced up from inside, and their eyes met through the glass. For one breath, she seemed to ask the same question. "Do you hear it too?" He almost nodded. But donors crowded the space, blocking her view, her attention swallowed by heart's booming certainties. Noah lowered his eyes to the mop water, to his own reflection shimmering in soap foam. He looked like a ghost. The line gleamed before him, dry, spotless, perfect, a border polished for men in suits. He whispered again, this time not to himself but to the floor, to the current, to the invisible language only he could hear. "It's going to blow." And when it did, no one could say they hadn't been warned, though no one had listened. The morning of the stress test began with spectacle. MIT's Helios lab had been polished until it gleamed like a museum exhibit. Donors filed in wearing suits that smelled faintly of cedar closets and cologne. The lab technicians had scrubbed the floors twice, cables coiled neatly in trays, servers blinking in uniform rhythm. Even the cooling pumps had been fitted with new flow meters, their LED readouts glowing like watchful eyes. This was the day when Helios would prove its worth. A full-load trial, all accelerators firing, all pumps roaring, every watt of the new distribution system harnessed. If the demo succeeded, funding for the next 5 years would be guaranteed. If it failed, reputations would collapse like brittle glass. Professor Julian Hart stood at the center, perfectly at ease. His voice carried the smooth certainty of marble pillars. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "you are witnessing the birth of a frontier. Algorithms demand power, and power, once wild, once dangerous, here bends to our command. This is inevitability." The donors smiled. Their eyes lingered on the racks as though they were vaults filled with gold. Dr. Miriam Klein stood behind Hart, jaw set. She respected his brilliance, but she distrusted his performance. Machines did not bow to rhetoric. Machines bowed to physics, and physics had no mercy. Noah Reed wheeled a cart of trays down the service corridor. He was not supposed to be here now. The dish pit overflowed. Ms. Delaney had barked at him twice already, but something had pulled him toward the lab. Through the glass, he saw it. The cathedral of power alive, fans shrieking, lights flashing, Hart's hands raised like a conductor's. And beneath all that spectacle, Noah felt it again. That whisper, a hum that didn't belong. He stopped, hand braced on the cart. The floor under his boots quivered, subtle but distinct. He sniffed the air. Ozone, metallic and sharp. And another note, the faint sweetness of phenolic resin heating beyond tolerance. His chest tightened. He knew that smell. He had once woken at 2 a.m. to it in the trailer, pulling his mother outside seconds before their old fan's motor caught fire. Now it was here, in MIT's crown jewel, and no one else seemed to notice. Inside, Layla hovered near the auxiliary distribution cabinet. She frowned, her nose twitching. She didn't know the vocabulary, but she felt the unease. She took half a step toward Dr. Klein. Dr. Klein, Hart's voice thundered over hers. Observe how seamlessly the system scales. From idle draw to maximum throughput in seconds, no instability, no dropouts. He gestured grandly, silencing her without even turning. Donors applauded. The room smelled of money and arrogance. Noah pressed closer to the glass. He saw Layla's lips tighten, saw her hands twitch nervously at her sides. He wanted to shout, but his throat locked. Invisible boys didn't shout into glass walls. The pumps howled louder as the array drew its peak current. Digital gauges climbed, flow rates surging. Arjun, the sleepless graduate student, hunched over a console. His eyes darted nervously between temperature graphs. "We're pushing close to cavitation limits," he murmured to Klein. She nodded, calm but sharp. "Hold the line. If we dip below NPSH margin, shut the pump immediately." Hart overheard and smirked. "Always the pessimist, Miriam. The system can handle more than your conservative estimates." "Physics doesn't care for optimism," she shot back. Noah leaned his forehead against the glass, Hart hammering. He could see the auxiliary cabinet now, its paint slightly discolored around the neutral bar. A faint shimmer of heat waves rose from it, visible only to eyes searching for them. He muttered to himself, "Loose lug, backfeed risk, coils sticking." The words were useless here. They bounced off the glass like trapped birds. The donors were watching a live visualization now. Streams of data dancing across a wall-sized screen, showing computations racing through Helios's accelerators. Hart narrated with the cadence of a preacher. "Notice the throughput. Notice the efficiency. Imagine the future. Autonomous systems, climate models, cures for diseases, all accelerated here in this room." Applause swelled again. Only Noah saw the tiny flicker on the panel's status light. Only he heard the sizzle beneath the applause. And then, crack. A sound like a whip snapping. The lights hiccuped. Fans faltered for a fraction of a second. Smoke, thin as a ghost's veil, curled from the edge of the cabinet. The donors gasped. Hart froze mid-sentence. Klein barked, "Hit the emergency stop!" Arjun slammed his palm onto the big red mushroom button. The racks shuddered. Then, impossibly, some fans kept running. Backfeed. Exactly as Noah feared. Inside, panic began to bloom. Noah dropped the tray cart. His body moved before thought could catch it. He grabbed the wooden mop handle he'd leaned against the wall earlier and sprinted toward the secondary E-stop outside the cabinet. "Reed!" Ms. Delaney shrieked behind him. "What are you—" But Noah didn't hear. He slammed the mop handle against the button. Clack! This time the sound was clean, final. The hum in the floor cut off. The lights fell dark, then returned under emergency power. The fans sighed into silence. For a moment, all of Helios seemed to exhale. Noah stood panting, mop handle trembling in his hands. Soap still clung to his sleeves. His chest heaved, but his eyes were steady on the cabinet. He had seen this before, in smaller, humbler forms. A toaster rewired wrong, a fan about to ignite, a breaker hot enough to blister fingers. This was the same language, just spoken in a cathedral instead of a trailer. Dr. Klein turned, eyes locking on him through the open doorway. For the first time in her career, she looked past the ranks of donors and professors and saw salvation in a dishwasher's stance. Professor Hart, red-faced, sputtered, What the hell is this? Who let him touch—" Klein cut him off. "Quiet, Julian." Her voice was sharp as a breaker snapping shut. "He just saved your billion-dollar demo." The donors murmured, stunned. Layla's face broke into a half-smile, half-sob of relief. Arjun stared, wide-eyed, as though seeing Noah for the first time. Noah only stood there, Chest still rising, mop handle lowered like a sword returned to its sheath. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The cabinet smoked quietly in the corner, a reminder that machines don't listen to speeches. They listen only to those who understand their language. And Noah Reed had just proven he spoke it fluently. For a heartbeat after Noah struck the secondary emergency stop, silence reigned. The server's roar cut out, replaced by the faint tick of cooling metal. The donors stood frozen, their applause swallowed mid-clap. But silence never lasts in a machine straining at its seams. From the auxiliary cabinet came another sound. Thin, high, dangerous. A squeal, like a violin string tuned far past breaking, then flash. Blue-white light burst from the panel seam, brighter than a camera bulb. The crack was sharp, metallic, hungry. An arc. For an instant, the entire corridor glowed, shadows carved into the walls like fossils. Several donors cried out. One stumbled back against the glass, clutching his chest. Layla shielded her eyes, tears stinging from the ozone. Noah didn't flinch. He knew this language. The arc was a warning, not a surprise. "Shut it down!" Dr. Miriam Klein barked, voice cutting through chaos. "Isolate the panel!" Arjun scrambled, hands shaking over the console, eyes darting across breaker maps. "It's not responding, it's backfed from the coil." Hart, pale for once, jabbed a finger toward Noah. "This is your fault! You tampered—" "No," Klein snapped. "This is wiring." Noah's body moved before thought could catch up. He crossed the corridor, pushing past donors who recoiled at the smell of burning insulation. He grabbed a non-contact tester from the wall, something left behind by a maintenance tech, and pressed its nose toward the cabinet seam. The tester screamed with light. Live. Still live. He turned, voice steady. "The main disconnect. You've got to cut upstream." Arjun blinked, lost. Hart sputtered. Klein, eyes sharp, barked, "Where?" Noah pointed without hesitation. "Service hall. 60-amp disconnect, gray handle. Lock it out or you'll cook the bus." Klein didn't ask how he knew. She simply ran, lab coat flaring. Noah followed, mop handle still in his grip like a staff. Behind them, donors pressed against the far wall, whispering about lawsuits, liability, failure. They reached the gray box mounted near the HVAC return. Its handle was stiff, paint chipped. "Pull it," Noah said. Klein braced herself, yanked hard. The handle fought, then surrendered with a metallic groan. The lights in Helios dipped, then steadied under emergency power. The squeal in the panel died like a wounded animal. Noah exhaled. His whole body seemed to drop 2 inches. But the danger wasn't gone. The servers, deprived of full power, were still hot. The pumps had choked mid-cycle. If coolant flow wasn't restored, the accelerators would cook themselves within minutes. Arjun's voice cracked. "We're losing thermal margin. Core temps climbing." Klein's jaw clenched. "If we can't restart pumps, the boards are finished." Hart spread his hands, furious and helpless. "Then it's over. Years of work." "Not yet," Noah interrupted, his voice cutting like wire strippers through insulation. Everyone turned. Noah stepped closer to the panel, scanning it like a doctor over a patient. He pointed at the charred neutral lug, the coils scorched brown. "Your coil's welded shut. That's why the backfeed. And your neutral's loose. That's where the heat came from." Layla, wide-eyed, whispered, "How do you know that?" "Because I've seen it," Noah said simply. "Trailer park wiring. Different scale, same failure." Hart scoffed. "You expect us to let a dishwasher diagnose a multi-million-dollar system?" Klein's eyes didn't leave Noah's. She saw no arrogance, no performance, only certainty. Go on, she said. Noah knelt, careful, fingers hovering but not touching. You need cooling back online. The pumps are everything. Forget the whole array. Save the pumps and you save the boards. Arjun stammered. But the coil's dead. The control won't. Then bypass it, Noah said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Isolate the bad leg. Feed the pump control from a clean supply. Even a bench supply fused will hold it long enough. Klein's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting a temporary jumper? With protection, Noah said. 1 amp slow-blow fuse inline. Label everything. Tie it clean with Wago connectors so no one slips. Give it 10 minutes to stabilize cooling. That's all you need. Arjun's mouth fell open. He had studied under Hart for 3 years, memorized equations, simulated load models, but he had never heard anyone speak about power with such grounded, tactile precision. Klein made her decision in less than a second. Do it! Hart exploded. Miriam, this is madness! You'd let... She cut him with a glare. Julian, you had your theories. Right now, I need solutions. Noah rose, setting his mop handle aside. He moved with quiet purpose, as though the dish pit had always been training for this. His hands were steady, soap-worn but sure. Together with Klein, he opened a side panel, found the pump's control leg, traced the wires like arteries. He explained as he went, his voice low but clear. This is your 24 VDC coil. Current rating 0.5 amp. If we isolate it from the fried line and feed it from a bench supply, we can carry the pump. But you've got to fuse it. 1 wrong surge and the board goes. Klein nodded, following every word. Layla fetched a portable supply from a workstation. Arjun scrambled for a fuse. Hart stood apart, red-faced, muttering about liability. The donors were silent now, watching the boy who had once been invisible bend wires in their billion-dollar cathedral. The moment stretched. Noah clipped, stripped, twisted, capped. Each gesture was a prayer. He set the fuse, tightened connections, checked polarity twice. Ready, he said at last. Klein gave the nod. Power it. Layla flipped the supply on. A faint hum answered. The pump shuddered, then steadied, water flowing once more through the manifold. Arjun stared at the thermal graph on his screen. Temps are stabilizing, he whispered. We're safe. A collective exhale swept the room. Noah leaned back on his heels, sweat beading at his temples, but his eyes calm. He had not saved the world. He had simply listened to the machine when no one else could. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one donor, a silver-haired man with a voice like gravel, asked softly, Who is he? Noah glanced down at his apron, stained with soap and broth. He almost laughed. Dr. Klein answered, voice steady. The one who just saved your investment. Hart sputtered, but the words hung heavy in the room. Noah didn't bask. He simply retrieved his mop handle, wiped his hands on his apron, and said the only thing that mattered. You'll want to retorque every lug before you bring that panel back online, and replace the coil. Otherwise, this happens again. Then he stepped back toward the line on the floor, the one Ms. Delaney had said never to cross. But everyone in the room knew the line no longer held. When the pump steadied and the thermal graph flattened, sound returned to Helios in careful fragments. The soft hiss of coolant, a low murmur from emergency lights, someone's stifled cough. The room, moments ago a cathedral of panic, became a workshop again. Now we make it safe, Dr. Miriam Klein said. Noah Reed nodded. The words matched the beat of his blood. He set the bench supply's amperage limit a notch lower, habit, and stepped back from the improvised feed. The donor cluster remained at a distance. their suits forming a dark shore beyond which they hesitated to wade. Professor Hart hovered at the periphery, anger cooling into embarrassment, then into something harder to name. "Walk me through it," Klein said quietly, as if they were the only two people in the room. "Properly." "Lockout, tagout," Noah answered. "For real this time. Not just hitting E-stops." He moved to the gray disconnect he and Klein had pulled a few minutes earlier. The handle still hung in the off position like a flag at half-mast. "Step 1, Noah said, voice steady. "Notify. Everyone here needs to know we're about to isolate and verify zero energy. Arjun, tell your team, no one touches anything unless we say so. Layla, you're a second set of eyes." He paused, glanced at Hart, then returned to the work. Step 2, shutdown. Already done. Step 3, isolate. That's this handle. But isolation isn't trust. We verify. Layla fetched a roll of danger tags and a small lockout hasp from a maintenance caddy. "Use these?" "Yeah." Noah slipped the hasp through the disconnect's hasp hole, clipped a lock into it, and wrote on the red tag in block letters, "Panel out of service. Do not energize. Noah R. M. Klein." He looped the tag so it hung bright and undeniable. "We tag for people, not for panels," he said. "Names make it real." Arjun handed over a multimeter and a pair of insulated gloves. Noah pulled the gloves on. The room watched his motions with the collective attention reserved for surgeons and bomb techs. "Test before touch," he said, more to himself than anyone. He clicked the meter to AC volts, proved the meter live on a known source at a neighboring receptacle, then stepped carefully to the auxiliary cabinet. Prove the tester, test the circuit, prove the tester again. No exceptions. Klein stood at his shoulder. Hart, despite himself, edged closer. Noah cracked the cabinet door a fraction. Heat washed his cheeks. The ghost of trouble, not the furnace blast of danger, but not yet the cool of safety. He kept his hands outside, touched the meter leads to the panel's line side lugs. Nothing. He moved to the load side. Nothing. He flicked back to the neighboring source. The meter chirped, proving itself. "Absence of voltage confirmed," he said. "But we still treat with respect." Klein nodded once, small and satisfied. "Proceed." They opened the cabinet fully. The wound lay visible now, a neutral lug with a dark halo, insulation toasted tea brown, a faint pearling on the copper where micro-arcs had eaten at it. The contactor coil sat scorched and reluctant, its armature misaligned by heat, the very picture of a device that had tried to become a weld. A short diagnostic label above the coil read 24 VDC coil, 0.45 a nominal. Someone had penciled plus 10% beside it months ago. "Who torqued these lugs?" Noah asked softly. Arjun swallowed. "Facilities. Last week. New panel install." "Did they follow torque spec?" Noah's voice held no accusation, only the need for an answer. I assumed so," Arjun said. "Assumptions arc," Noah replied, a sentence that felt older than he was. He lifted an infrared thermometer, aimed, and read off a surface temperature still high enough to demand caution. "We'll remake this connection after a cool down and replace the coil." He traced the control side wiring with a finger that never touched bare metal. "Here's your backfeed path. The interlock is landed on the wrong terminal. When the coil stuck, it fed back into the E-stop circuit, holding life where death was commanded." Hart bristled. "That's an outrageous claim." "Not a claim," Noah said, and pointed. "A wire." Hart followed the pointing. He saw it, the interlock jumper, one lug off, the kind of mistake no schematic would confess but every camera would catch. His mouth opened, then closed again. "Document," Klein said. Layla snapped photos from 3 angles, each one clear, the wire labeling visible. Arjun pulled the latest electrical one-line and control schematic onto his tablet. Side by side, the paper truth and the copper truth made their disagreement undeniable. The donors, sensing a shift from drama to procedure, began to relax. One of them, the silver-haired man with gravel in his voice, stepped nearer. "You prevented a fire," he said to Noah. It was not praise. It was a fact finding another fact. "I prevented a different one," Noah corrected gently. "This is still a burn." "We need to clean it." He listed what they needed: a new contactor coil, a torque wrench with the correct range, antioxidation compound for the aluminum lugs, Wago lever nuts for the temporary control bypass they'd already made safe with the fused bench supply, a small label printer to remark the corrected interlock. Arjun sprinted to the storeroom. Layla jogged to facilities. Klein remained, eyes on the panel, mind assembling the steps in parallel. "Before reconnection," Noah continued, "we release stored energy, bleed down any capacitors in the adjacent drive modules, check for trapped mechanical energy on the pump side. Then we perform a try-start with controls still isolated, prove that a start command can't energize anything it shouldn't." "Speak to me like I'm a student," Hart said suddenly, surprising himself and everyone else. His voice had dropped the marble. "Why did the neutral matter here?" Noah glanced up. The question was earnest. He took it at face value. "Loose neutrals on a 3-phase 208Y 120 system can shift voltages on the single-phase branch circuits. Loads that expect 120 can see a lot more or less. Things heat. Control transformers suffer. Add a coil that's starting to stick, babe, and you've built yourself a path that doesn't care about your emergency stop. It cares about whichever path lets current keep flowing." "And the smell? Ozone?" Hart pressed, quieter. "Arcing air," Noah said. "Oxygen torn into something sharp. You learn it young if you grow up around broken things." Silence took a respectful step back. Arjun returned with parts and tools. Noah checked the torque spec stamped into the lug, ALCU 75 degrees, 45 in LB, and set the wrench accordingly. He waited for the metal to cool another few degrees, then cleaned the conductor, applied compound, relanded the neutral, and pulled until the wrench clicked. Clean. Certain. Unarguable. They pulled the fused bench supply lead and restored the coil path with the new contactor, this time landing the interlock where the schematic had always said it belonged. Layla printed and applied crisp labels. Arjun updated the digital one-line and pushed the revision to the lab wiki with an addendum. Field correction, photographs attached. Cause, mislanded interlock plus loose neutral. Effect, E-stop ineffectiveness and backfeed. Corrective action, coil replacement, lug retorque, labeling, lotto procedure review. "Moment of truth," Klein said. She looked to Noah. "Verify," he said first. The ritual mattered. He reproved the meter, retested the panel, found it still dead. Only then did he and Klein remove the lock and tag, retract the hasp, and, together, return the disconnect handle to on. The panel remained quiet, dignified. No sizzle, no heat bloom. The emergency lights stayed on as designed while Arjun brought the system to a controlled idle. The bench supply came out of circuit. The pumps held on their own. The graph on Arjun's screen settled into a lazy river rather than a cliff. Klein exhaled. "Bring the array up at 20%. Slowly." Arjun complied. The fans murmured. Nothing screamed. Nothing begged. The donor's shoulders fell from around their ears. Hart's eyes had not left Noah. Recognition, Not the cheap kind that swings a spotlight, but the stubborn kind that rearranges furniture in an old mind, worked its way across his face. "You shouldn't have been here," he said, not as a rebuke but as an admission of a failed system. "And yet, without you—" Noah shook his head. "It's not about me. It's about procedures. People. Names on tags." He tapped the red tag now hanging from a cable tray, kept there as a reminder. "When names enter the room, responsibility does too." The silver-haired donor cleared his throat. "Dr. Klein." "Professor Hart, what do you intend to do with this expertise?" Klein didn't answer immediately. She looked at Noah's hands, soap-etched, steady, untheatrical. She thought of every talk she'd given on access and talent pipelines, and how they always seemed to root around people like this. "First," she said, "we finish the post-incident review. Then we schedule a lab-wide lotto refresher. Then we fix our intake process so that the next Noah Reed we're lucky enough to meet isn't holding a mop when we need a torque wrench." Hart's gaze flicked to the tag with Noah's name. "And the boy?" Noah swallowed. The dish pit's steam smelled very far away now. "I have a shift in 20 minutes, he said, because truth is sometimes small and immediate before it becomes big. Klein smiled, a tired, fierce curve. "You have a shift in my lab tomorrow. Paid. Title. Assistant Systems Tech. Provisional." She turned to the donors. "Fund it if you like. If not, I'll cover it out of discretionary. Either way, it happens." A murmur moved through the suits, less like wind and more like gravity settling. The silver-haired donor nodded. "Fund it," he said simply. Others followed. Hart's mouth twitched, as close to humility as a proud man manages on a first try. "Mr. Reed," he said, "if you're going to work in Helios, you'll have to learn to argue with me. Properly." Noah almost smiled. "I can do that, sir. Respectfully. With evidence." "Good," Hart said. "It's the only language the place understands." They ran a final try-start with interlocks confirmed, e-stop tested and restoring cleanly, coil behavior normal. Klein initialed the log. Layla watched Noah coil the bench supply lead with care and understood something about dignity she had never been taught, that it wasn't bestowed. It was practiced, one clean gesture at a time. When the donors drifted away, the lab felt larger, airier. The smell of ozone had faded. The smell of soap, stubborn, human, lingered on Noah's sleeves. Ms. Delaney appeared at the doorway, torn between reprimand and awe. "Reed," she said, faltering. Your station." "I'll finish the shift," Noah said. "Then I'll be back here in the morning." She nodded and retreated, as if the building had shifted its walls and she needed to relearn the map. Klein extended her hand. Noah took it. Her grip was firm, as if she were closing a circuit. "We don't always get to choose our first names in a place like this," she said. "But we can choose the next one. Tomorrow, you're not Kid or Hey. You're Noah Reed on a badge. That changes how people speak to you. And it changes how you answer back." Noah looked at the red tag still swinging faintly on the cable tray, his name a bright seam in a room of steel and glass. He felt the reality of it, weighty as a torque wrench's click. Outside, Cambridge rain began to drum against the windows. Inside, Helios hummed at a civilized pitch. Somewhere far away, the dish pit conveyor belched a tray and moved on. The world was the same, and not the same. "Tomorrow," Noah said. "Tomorrow," Klein echoed. They stood in the quiet a moment longer, listening as the lab, finally, spoke the language of safety. The pumps hummed on their borrowed lifeline, fed by the bench supply Noah had spliced with Wago connectors and a slow-blow fuse. Their vibration was steady, healthy, the sound of a machine grateful to be heard. On Arjun's screen, the thermal graph that had threatened to cliff dive now traced a plateau. Relief washed through Helios like fresh air, but it was a fragile relief. The bypass was temporary, a patch on an artery. Everyone knew it. Dr. Miriam Klein crouched near Noah, studying the improvised feed with practiced eyes. "It's safe," she said quietly, "but only for the short term. This supply isn't rated for continuous duty at that amperage." "I know," Noah replied. His fingers rested lightly on the insulation, feeling the faint warmth. "It'll hold long enough to swap the coil and remake the lug. Nothing more." Across the room, the donors began to murmur again. Their initial terror had softened into curiosity tinged with unease. Suits huddled, whispers spilling like loose paper. What just happened? Who is this boy? What about liability? Professor Julian Hart, regaining color in his cheeks, found his voice. "This is an embarrassment," he declared. "A billion-dollar facility relying on a child with dish soap on his sleeves. This will not stand." Klein rose slowly, fixing him with a stare sharp enough to draw blood. "What will not stand is your wiring oversight," she said. "The interlock was mislanded, the neutral was loose. This was negligence, and it could have killed someone." Hart bristled. "You're suggesting my lab—" "No," she cut him off. "I'm stating our lab nearly burned, and this boy kept it alive." The silver-haired donor stepped forward, gravel in his voice. "Dr. Klein, do you mean to tell us this? Dishwasher prevented catastrophic failure?" "Yes," Klein said simply, "because he understood what none of us paused to see." Noah, still kneeling, looked up from the bench supply. "I didn't save it," he said. "I bought time. You still need to replace the coil, re-torque the lug, and verify the interlock. Right now, this is a patch job." His tone was plain, factual, but to the donors it rang like prophecy. One of them, a woman in a silk scarf, folded her arms. "If that patch holds, we salvage today's test. If it fails, we're back to square one." Noah nodded. "Then don't push it. Idle load only. No stress runs until it's fixed." Klein's lips twitched, the faintest smile. She recognized the language of responsibility. The debate broke open. Hart paced like a caged animal, torn between fury and fear. "This boy is unqualified. Liability alone." Arjun interrupted, surprising even himself. "With respect, Professor, he's the only one who understood what was happening. I didn't. You didn't. None of us smelled it until it burned. He did." Layla added softly, "He saw it days ago. I think he knew before any of us." The room turned toward Noah. He felt the weight of attention press against him, heavier than soap buckets, heavier than trays. He wanted to vanish back into steam, but he held his ground. "I don't care about titles," he said. "I care about current paths, about lugs tightened to spec, about e-stops that actually stop. That's all." Klein clapped her hands once. The sound cracked like a breaker closing. "Enough! This isn't about pride or embarrassment. It's about safety. We have a post-incident review to complete. Arjun, log the fault. Layla, compile the photos. Professor Hart, you'll help me draft a corrective report." Hart sputtered. "Draft? For whom?" "For the Institute Safety Committee, and for our donors, who deserve transparency." The silver-haired donor raised a hand. "Transparency is commendable. But what about continuity? What assurance do we have this won't happen again?" Klein turned to Noah. "Tell them." Noah blinked. "Me?" "You found it. You fixed it. You tell them how we prevent it." He drew a slow breath. His voice, when it came, was calm. Lock out, tag out on every panel every time. Torque every lug to spec with a calibrated wrench. Verify absence of voltage before touch. Label every interlock and prove it against the schematic. No exceptions. The donors absorbed his words, the cadence of procedure delivered without flourish. A few nodded. One took notes. Hart, cornered, sneered. He recites like a manual. That doesn't make him an engineer. Klein's reply was ice. No, it makes him someone who remembers that manuals are written in blood. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. When the donors finally left, escorted by staff, the lab exhaled. Emergency lighting dimmed. Only the hum of the bench supply remained, a fragile heartbeat. Klein knelt beside Noah again. "You should be in class," she said, softer now. "Not just the pit." "I can't afford it," Noah replied. "Then we'll find a way." Her voice was steady, but inside she felt something shift. For years she had spoken on diversity in STEM, on outreach, on hidden pipelines of talent. But here, in soap-soaked sleeves, was the embodiment of everything the system pretended to seek and usually failed to see. She would not let him vanish again. Noah returned to the dish pit late, long after his shift had started. Ms. Delaney scowled. "Reed, where the hell have you been? We're drowning in trays." He slipped back into the steam, wordless. The conveyor clattered, soap foamed. His hands found their rhythm. Yet in the echo of the lab he heard Klein's promise. "We'll find a way." And for the first time in years, the pit did not feel like a prison. It felt like a place one steps through, like a doorway leading eventually to light. Morning light cut through the atrium windows of Building 38, gilding the glass walls of Helios Lab. The night had passed in a blur of reports, photographs, and sleepless minds. By dawn, one truth was unavoidable. The bypass Noah Reed built was still holding. The pumps purred, the accelerators slept, and billions of dollars in equipment had been spared. But temporary was not permanent. Machines had long memories, and bandages were never enough. Today would be the day they fixed Helios properly. Dr. Miriam Klein gathered her team just past 8 a.m. A torque wrench lay across the table beside a fresh contactor coil. Its surface clean and silver, the copper windings still gleaming with factory lacquer. A carton of Noalox antioxidation compound sat open, its aluminum gray paste waiting to be spread. "This is no demonstration," she told the group. "This is repair. We do it by the book. No shortcuts, no assumptions." Her eyes flicked toward Arjun, Layla, then, deliberately, to Noah. Professor Julian Hart stood near the back, silent. He had dressed immaculately, as always, but there was a tremor in his jaw, the faint look of a man unaccustomed to standing on ground he hadn't chosen. Noah washed his hands twice before stepping into the lab. The smell of soap clung to him still, but today he wore a clean MIT facilities polo Klein had insisted he borrow. It felt strange across his shoulders, like an identity he hadn't earned. He moved toward the open panel. The charred coil still sat inside, its surface blackened, insulation bubbled. The neutral lug showed the telltale bruises of heat, copper gone dull, aluminum scarred. He could almost hear it whispering the story of last night's panic. "Step 1, he murmured, as though teaching himself. "Loto." Layla handed him a red tag already filled in with his name. Together with Klein, he pulled the disconnect handle, locked it, tagged it, proved the meter live, tested the panel dead, then proved the meter again. The ritual mattered. Only when every head nodded did he touch the coil. The replacement was methodical. The old coil was removed, its terminals documented and bagged as evidence. The new coil was seated, bolted in with the click of a calibrated wrench. Arjun applied a thin smear of Noalox to the lug surfaces, then handed the conductor to Noah, who re-landed it with care. Noah set the torque wrench to 45 in LB, checked the spec twice, and turned until the wrench clicked. He smiled faintly. Click means trust. Layla rerouted the interlock wire to the correct terminal, her hands steady under Noah's quiet direction. She printed a new label and affixed it neatly. E-stop interlock. Verified 2025-09-26. Klein inspected every step. Not hovering, not doubting, watching as one professional watches another. When the panel was whole again, Noah wiped his hands on a rag. The coil gleamed, the lugs shone, the interlock label sat crisp and undeniable. The cabinet looked ordinary. Machines always did, even after crisis. Moment of truth, Klein said. Noah nodded. He reached for the tag. His own name stared back at him. Noah R. He hesitated. For so long, invisibility had been his armor. Now his name hung on steel for everyone to see. He unclipped the lock, removed the tag, and together with Klein restored the disconnect to on. The hum returned, clean even, without sizzle or arc. Arjun ran the diagnostic. Pumps online, no abnormal load, emergency stop circuit verified. He pressed the E-stop. The system dropped instantly. He reset. It came back smoothly, exactly as the schematic promised. System safe, Arjun reported, voice trembling with relief. The donors were not present today. Only the lab, its people, and its silence. That was enough. Hart cleared his throat. He paused, words battling pride. I misjudged. Not just the panel. Not just the wiring. You too, Reed. Noah looked up, wary. You shouldn't have been there, Hart continued. But you were. And when theory failed, you didn't. It was not flowery. It was not generous. But it was the closest thing to an apology Hart had given in years. Noah answered simply. Machines don't care who's supposed to be here. They care who listens. The words landed heavy. Hart nodded once, stiffly, as though conceding to gravity. Klein broke the moment. Noah, she said, we can't pretend you're just a dishwasher anymore. I've filed paperwork for you to join Helios as an assistant systems technician. Provisional. It's part-time, paid, with mentorship. You'll still have shifts in the pit if you need them, but you belong here. Noah's heart lurched. He thought of rent overdue, of his mother's hands worn raw from night shifts. He thought of trays and steam and soap that never remembered his name. And now, his name on a badge. He faltered. I don't know if I belong. Klein's gaze softened. Belonging isn't something they give you. It's something you claim. You claimed it last night. Now let's make it official. The lab applauded. Not the thunderous applause of donors, but the quiet, honest applause of colleagues who had seen death in a wire and lived because someone else had listened. Layla grinned. Arjun wiped his eyes quickly, pretending it was dust. Even Hart allowed himself a tight nod, as though secretly relieved the boy had said yes. Noah held the badge Klein handed him, still warm from the printer. His name was etched there in block letters. Noah Reed, Assistant Systems Tech, Provisional. He ran a thumb across the letters, half expecting them to vanish like foam on a tray. They didn't. That night, when his shift in the dish pit ended, Noah walked past the line of tiles he had once polished for donors. The line no longer felt like a boundary. It felt like a bridge. The smell of soap clung to his sleeves. The smell of ozone lingered faintly in his memory. Between them stretched a new identity, fragile but real. Machines would fail again, he knew that. People would forget names again, he knew that too. But once, just once, in a billion-dollar lab at MIT, Noah Reed had been seen, and nothing could unsee it. Cambridge woke to rain the next morning, droplets tracing long, uneven paths down the glass of Building 38. Inside Helios, the air smelled clean again. No ozone, no char, just the ordinary perfume of coolant and circuitry. The auxiliary panel hummed quietly, repaired, retorqued, labeled like scripture. But something deeper had shifted, less visible than wires, more enduring than copper. At 9 o'clock, the lab convened not for a test, not for a repair, but for reflection. Klein stood at the front with her sleeves rolled, a sheaf of notes in her hand. Hart sat stiffly nearby, and the students formed a semicircle around them. Noah lingered at the edge, his new badge clipped awkwardly to his borrowed polo. Klein began without theatrics. "Yesterday we almost lost Helios. We survived because someone saw what the rest of us overlooked. Not because of credentials, but because of attention." Noah Reed smelled ozone before graphs blinked. He acted when arrogance froze. She let the words hang. "We can't afford to ignore invisible people anymore. Not here. Not anywhere." Hart cleared his throat. "I've submitted a formal acknowledgement to the Institute Safety Committee. It will include the coil replacement, the mislanded interlock, and Mr. Reed's intervention." His voice was flatter than usual, his polish dulled, but his words were sincere. "He deserves credit in the record." Noah shifted, uneasy. "I don't need my name in reports." Klein looked at him. "It's not about needing, it's about truth." Layla, emboldened, spoke up. "Then maybe truth should change more than reports. He's not the only invisible one here. How many students work 2 jobs just to scrape by? How many custodians or cafeteria staff pass through these halls with skills nobody ever asks about?" Silence answered her. The silver-haired donor reappeared mid-meeting, umbrella dripping at his side. His voice carried like gravel rolled in water. "Dr. Klein, I've discussed with my colleagues. Yesterday convinced us. We'll fund whatever program you design, but we want more than a repair. We want reform." Klein smiled faintly. "Then you'll get it. We're calling it the Invisible Hands Initiative. Paid apprenticeships for service staff who demonstrate technical skills. Bridge courses in math, physics, and safety. A pathway from mop handles to torque wrenches, from dish pits to labs." Her eyes swept the room. "If Noah hadn't crossed a line yesterday, Helios would be ash. I want every line in this institute to be a bridge instead." The donor nodded. "Write the charter. We'll sign." Noah listened, stunned. Words like initiative and charter floated above him like clouds, too large to hold. But one phrase landed square. From mop handles to torque wrenches. He looked down at his hands, still raw from soap, now inked with a faint sheen of Noah locks. The words fit. Hart spoke again, softer this time. "I spent years teaching optimization. Yesterday, a dishwasher optimized survival. That's a lesson I won't forget." His eyes met Noah's, steady. "And one I hope you'll teach me, in time." It was not an apology alone. It was an invitation. Weeks passed. The dish pit still steamed, trays still clattered, but a new rhythm echoed across MIT. Posters appeared on bulletin boards. Invisible hands. Apply now. Cafeteria workers, janitors, groundskeepers filled out forms. Some spoke broken English, some none at all, but the forms translated skills into possibilities. Wiring, plumbing, code, carpentry. Layla volunteered as a peer mentor. Arjun drafted training modules. Klein oversaw everything, relentless and precise. Even Hart contributed, grudgingly at first, then with growing commitment, designing a seminar titled Theory for the Hands. And Noah split his days. Morning in Helios, learning to read schematics with Arjun, torquing lugs with Klein, evenings in the pit, still scrubbing trays. He didn't abandon it, not yet. The soap kept him honest. The steam reminded him where he came from. One afternoon, a first-year custodian named Luis joined the program. He had never held a meter before. Noah showed him how to test live, how to prove the tester, how to respect wires. Luis's eyes lit with the same recognition Noah had felt the first time he smelled ozone and understood it. For the first time, Noah realized he wasn't just learning anymore. He was teaching. Months later, MIT's official press release came out. MIT launches Invisible Hands Initiative, from service work to science. Inspired by the actions of Noah Reid, who prevented catastrophic failure at Helios Lab, the program will identify and train hidden talent across campus. The article included a photo. Noah in his polo, standing beside Klein, Layla, and Arjun, the repaired cabinet glowing faintly behind them. Hart stood in the corner of the frame, expression unreadable but present. When Noah showed the article to his mother, she cried quietly at their kitchen table in Worcester. "They finally see you," she whispered. Noah shook his head gently. "They see more than me. They see people like us." The night after the press release, Noah walked alone through the quiet halls of Building 38. The lab was dark except for status lights pulsing gently, green and alive. He paused at the auxiliary cabinet, touched the cool metal of its door. Once, this had been a border. Now it was a doorway. He whispered to the hum inside, "Thank you." The hum answered in silence, steady and sure. From dish pit to lab, from mop handle to torque wrench, Noah Reid's story had crossed the line. But it was not only his story now. It was a systems story, rewritten. MIT would remember the night of ozone and soap. The world beyond would hear it too, reshaped into legend, a boy no one saw, saving what everyone needed, and forcing an institution to look in its own mirror. And in that reflection, the invisible became visible at last. Thank you so much for staying with this story until the very end. If Noah's journey moved you, from soap and steam to circuits and recognition, please support us by subscribing. Every subscription, every comment, every share helps these hidden genius stories reach more hearts around the world.